On September 11, 2001, the entire country was completely devastated. 2 hijacked planes hit the Twin Towers in New York City. Additionally, 1 plane hit the Pentagon, and a 4th plane crashed in Pennsylvania. The world has never been the same since. Each year on September 11th, we remember what happened on that day throughout the entire country and throughout John Carroll. Many of those who lived through the events of September 11th recall vividly what happened to them and where they were when they heard the news of the terrorist attack. The Patriot was able to interview several members of the John Carroll staff who recounted their experiences 14 years ago and how it has affected them since. Where were you, and what was going on when you heard about the 9/11 attacks?
I was here at school. We were having the opening school mass in the gymnasium. Father Sutton was the priest at the time, and that was the place where I found out that something had happened. I don't think anybody in the school knew what had happened until Father Sutton said something about praying for the people who died in the airplane crash, and we didn't know what airplane crash he was talking about.
So when did you learn the details of what happened?
Well, that's something that I'm not quite sure of. At some point, the principal got up and dismissed everyone from school. So the students were leaving, faculty were leaving. I stayed here at school for a while, and at that time we had a number of nuns on the staff, one of which was Sister John Bernadine. She ran the copy room across the hall, and she asked if she could come in and sit with me and watch the television up here. And so we sat for a while and watched the TV, not believing what we were seeing. We had no idea about all the things that were going on. And after a while, we both kind of said, well, this is too tragic to just stay here. And so she left and went over to the convent, which is now St. Joseph's Hall, and I packed up and I went home.
Well, I was in room 133 in St. Mark's High School in Wilmington, Delaware. It was a Tuesday morning. It was right after homeroom, and I was in a first period class with, I believe, a group of freshmen. And quite honestly, we didn't hear about it, but because of a technology glitch where the Whittle TV in my room didn't turn off, we were watching it live, as we're not live, but as live as we could, as it was being flashed on CNN. So it was very stunning to us.
I was in college. It was my junior year, and so 2001. Junior year, I was at Penn State, and during the first attack, I was with my guidance counselor. I was literally in an office just like this, and going over scheduling some classes for the second semester. And she left the room for a minute and came back and said that she would have to postpone this meeting. And the reason was because she said there was a terrorist attack. So at that point I left the office and I went to the Student Union building. It's called the Hub at Penn State. I went to the Hub, and there was a very large kind of projector TV in the student center area. And there was a bunch of people crowded around, and then we all saw the second plane hit the second tower. So that's when I can't remember if classes were canceled at that point. I think I did go home. I lived in an off-campus apartment, and so I went home, and then I think I probably watched Fox News for probably 48 hours straight.
Where was I on the day of 9/11? I was at work. and it was quite shocking. It kind of left an empty spot in my chest.
On 9/11, we happened to be at our opening mass for school 14 years ago. Father Steve was saying mass in the gym, and it happened that we had a group of Spanish students here from Toledo, Spain, and their teacher, and they had just been introduced, and Father was going on with the mass, and there was an interruption because I think it was Mr. Barker walked up to Father Steve and let him know that something was happening. And I believe we finished Mass, and we were sent back to at the time they were homerooms, not advisories. And we watched what was going on the television in our room and on the TVs that are mounted in the classroom. And we were all very, very frightened. It was scary because we didn't know what was going on and what was going to happen next.
And what did you think at the time that you first heard of it? Did you know how serious it was at first?
Well, I was really frightened. As I told you before, there was a complication in that the day before, not 24 hours before, the Spanish students when they come to visit us, they always visit New York. And they visited New York on the 10th of September, and they were at the top of the World Trade Center at 11:26 the day before the towers were destroyed. So that was the thing that really scared me to death. And I was so upset that I had sent one of the other Spanish teachers with the group. And I felt responsible. I felt responsible that maybe she could have gotten hurt or the group could have gotten hurt. And but we really had no control over that because I had made the arrangements for that trip in July. So that was just a date we happened to choose, and we were happy because it was a nice clear day, and the next day was a nice clear day. And but they had a wonderful day in New York, but at the time, we didn't know what was going to happen.
And how did the day feel for you overall?
It was a depressing day. After I got home from school, I don't think I even ate lunch or dinner that day. I wanted to know what went on because I wasn't aware of how widespread this was. Several planes from different areas landing in New York City, in the building, the World Trade Center, and then the plane in Pennsylvania. It was all too much to conceive that this could be happening in our country. But I had to watch. I had to find out what was going on, and I ended up sitting there with a remote, changing channels, trying to get other information.
Well, I mean, as a teacher, you understand and you come to recognize that anything out of the ordinary is going to send students into some sort of mode that's not exactly order filled. So, once that happened, and once the students began to realize and the teachers began to realize that there was something bigger going on, it was a very strange and almost surreal day where people it was like you wanted to know what was going on. At the same time, you didn't want to know what was going on because it was so mind-boggling. And then you heard about the Pentagon being hit, and then you hear about the plane going down in the field in western Pennsylvania, and it becomes an almost out-of-body experience, if you will. You're not really sure that this isn't a dream.
So it was kind of surreal, like just it didn't feel like all of this actually happened.
No, it was almost as if, after a while, it just took on the feel of being, one thing after another happened. And it was almost as if this doesn't happen in the United States. This doesn't happen in my country. In that way, it was kind of flooring. It was very surreal. And then whenever President Bush shut down all flights in the United States, the quiet that you've never really experienced before. You know, planes have been flying for as long as I've been alive, for as long as anybody's been alive. And to not hear them, the absence of them was almost as loud as a plane itself, if that makes any sense.
It's just a little surreal. I mean, it was, I lived through what I guess some people consider my generation's Pearl Harbor. You know, that hadn't happened in a very long time. So I knew things would be different. I think I knew that when they shut down all flight, and I remember there was a field next to my apartment, and I remember seeing the first commercial airline in the air after the attack, because all flights were grounded around the country, and it was for many days. And so I looked up, and I remember I just watched this airplane, and I just knew that things would be different. I didn't know. No one knew how different. We didn't know we'd have to take our shoes off and that travel. I remember being picked up at the gate at the airport. I mean, your family used to be able to just wait right outside the airplane while you came off the ramp, and just things like that just changed basically overnight. I know that's not huge changes, but yeah, it was just I just knew things would be different.
It was an empty feeling. It was oh, wow, does this really happen? Is this a dream? You know, some people wanted to leave work and go home and be with their families. It was a sense of big sadness, and it's all you wanted to do is be near the ones that you loved, knowing how many people were passed away on that day.
It was frightening. It was absolutely frightening. My daughter was at college. All the professors sent their kids home that day. My husband was working at home, and he called and wanted us all back home immediately. As a matter of fact, everybody wanted to be home immediately because there were rumors of things happening at Aberdeen Proving Ground, or just because there are military installations near us, they were worried about them. They were also worried about, there were rumors that things were going to happen in Philadelphia and Baltimore, and we felt like we were in the center of a lot of trouble. So everybody tried to make it home very quickly.
What stood out to you the most on that day?
Two things. One, the suffering that people went through, both mental and physical. Of course, you had to feel for the people that lost their lives, and also the people who responded, the firemen, the policemen, and watching the World Trade Center collapse and the smoke and flames and all in the city really was depressing. That happened. That was something I'll never forget.
What stood out most to me on that day was getting back down here to Harford County, especially with the Aberdeen Proving Ground and the Edgewood Arsenal being real close to my house. The fact that there were actual troops out and armored vehicles and tanks out at intersections was really just, it was almost as if I stepped out of normalcy and stepped into a news report from, as I said, from a war-torn country. Nobody knew what was going on. It seemed as if everything that was so steady and so real had suddenly been flipped on its head.
What stood out to me the most that day was, normally here in the United States you got a sense of security. That sense of security wasn't quite there anymore. There was a little bit of sense of fear and a lot of sense of sadness, knowing how many people had died and perished that day. It's really a big change in your life when something like that happens, not just with your life, but with a lot of people's lives. You can only hope that as we've been known in the past, to stick together and to fight back, and to stand tall and proud of what we accomplished here, and have faith in our country, and that we will, we did find out who caused it, and we did put an end to it. And so our country had to rise again to the top and put back in the belief of security into the people into the United States, and a sense of belonging and a sense of safety, which was really taken from us that day.
So you think that since then we've reaccomplished that sense of security that we had before the attacks?
I think we have. But at the same time, we cannot take this for granted. Because when you take something like this for granted, there'll be someone there to try and take it away from you. So, yes, we've come a long way. We are secure. But we need to not take it for granted. We need to constantly be looking over our shoulder, I hate to say.
Just that there's people out there that really hate us. I remember I went to a Muslim student organization rally within the next 2 or 3 days after 9/11, and it was this group's their desire was to educate people about Islam and to talk about how that's not what they're about. And I remember it was interesting, that I don't know why I went, but I did, and it was interesting to hear them speak about their faith and how they were using the Quran and talking about verses that don't support what happened. And so I just remember that feeling like, okay, like these people are, yes, they're evil, and they don't like us, and I just that stood out to me. I think the most is that there's firsthand life experience that impacts us in a big way. There's people out there that really don't like the United States.
The solemn attitude of everyone around me. Everyone was just shocked, and there was such quiet. And also all of the airplanes were stopped. There was no air traffic. So you didn't hear the regular, jets going over, and you didn't see the vapor trails in the sky. It was like the world had stopped. It was very, very frightening.
What kind of impact do you think 9/11 has on the present day?
I think it taught us a lesson that we need to be vigilant. The fact that some people can get guns or other weapons and injure or kill other people in our country, it's really depressing. It shouldn't be that way. We need to be careful about who enters this country. I'm concerned about the border, not only the border with Mexico, but the border with Canada. We need to make sure that people who would do harm to the citizens of this country don't get in. Now, you can't stop everybody, but I think you can do the very best job you can by being vigilant and taking care of those situations.
And do you think we've done a good job of being safer and more careful about that since 9/11?
Well, if we're reducing the size of military and we don't have a secure border with Mexico, I don't think we're doing the best job that we can to secure the safety of the citizens in this country. I hope that when a new administration gets elected, that they will do something to improve that situation.
Oh, it's totally changed it's totally changed my country. It's totally changed what I was used to doing. My wife traveled for a living at that time, and before 9/11, I was able to go down and meet her at the gate when she got off the plane and help her carry her bags. You can't go down to airplane gates anymore. You can't enter the main part of the airport unless you're a ticketed passenger. you're taking off your shoes. There's a level, go into government buildings and public places. There's a higher level of security than we've ever had before. It's almost as if the terrorists had set out to change the American way of life, they managed to do it quite handily.
And do you think it's not only changed America, but the rest of the world as well?
It's changed the entire world completely. Maybe not so much so in other European countries where there was a heightened sense of security because they were often experiencing terrorism. But in the United States, this is totally foreign to anything that we've ever, or at least I've ever experienced in my 54 years.
And what kind of impact do you think that this event has on the present day?
Certainly in our politics, we're still involved in the region militarily, and Iran wasn't involved, but just still dealing with regimes in that area. And now we have the Syrian exodus, and I probably would say that they're all linked in some way. People need hope, and some people find their purpose in hatred, and that's still going on today. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people's lives have been lost fighting against this evil, but I think that overall it's a necessary fight, and that's really been the biggest impact on today, is that we have to be very careful, and our government has to do everything it's possible within its power to protect our interests here and abroad. So it's changed a lot, especially politically in this country in a big way.
I think we don't take things for granted, and I don't think we should take things for granted. I think we should appreciate what we have, love what we have, and unfortunately, I think as a country we'll always be looking over our shoulder at times, but I honestly believe let's not take what we have for granted.
Well, unfortunately, I think kids your age were 2 years old, 1 year old. You don't remember. And what bothers me most of all is that once something is over and done, people have a tendency to forget about it. And if it no longer has a direct impact on you, you don't worry about it. But people my age and people who lived through it and were affected some way, I think I feel it's important to remember what happened, and for us to be very cautious.
And why do you think it's important to remember things like these?
So that they don't repeat themselves. Okay? The worst thing that you can do is ignore a problem, because history will repeat itself.
And do you think that everyone else who was old enough to remember, do you think they're taking appropriate measures to make a change in the world to where something like this wouldn't happen again?
You mean everybody in general, the public?
Yes, the general public.
Well, I think one of the things that happened as a result of that day was that there was just a huge increase of patriotism. There were pictures on the internet. There were pictures in newspapers and magazines. People didn't have their flags flying, the U.S. flag flying. Maybe you'd see one or two on a street. After 9/11, there were streets full of U.S. flags. There was a huge increase in patriotism as a result of that. I think people just, people need something to shake them up every once in a while to realize how important patriotism is.
How did the people you knew and the people around you react when they found out about the attacks?
I have to say the people that I talked to, friends, relatives, and acquaintances, again, were very concerned about the damage that's been done. And I think the word vengeance would apply. A lot of people wanted to do something right away, strike out at somebody. But of course, at that time, we didn't know who actually performed the acts. Later on, it was determined that certain other individuals were involved, they planned it, and so they've been captured, and a number of them are being held down at Guantanamo in Cuba. But I would say that would be what most people that I talk to were concerned about.
Well, teaching in Wilmington, there were a fair amount of students who had brothers, sisters, family members who actually commuted from Wilmington to the World Trade Center every day. So, I had students in my class who were worried about loved ones even as the events were unfolding. There was a lot of anxious moments when people were trying to figure out if their dad or their mom on a business trip whose office was in the World Trade Center managed to get out. So, so firsthand, there was a lot of, firsthand experience with 9/11 just by being in the room with some of these folks.
It's interesting. Everyone pretty much around me reacted the same way. It's just they couldn't believe it happened. My college roommates one was from Finland, one was from Brazil. I was the only American in my apartment, so I don't know. I don't recall if it impacted them differently than it impacted me. But I just remember I called home. I talked to my parents. My dad was actually in Newark, New Jersey, on a flight going to the World Trade Center when the towers were hit. He worked for a company called Alex Brown, and they had an office in the World Trade Center that he was on his way to that very day. The plane didn't get there; it was rerouted back, and but everyone in his office lived. So, but that was probably like the closest I got to somebody who might have been impacted by 9/11. So everyone was reacting, thankful that no one that they knew was injured or involved, in any or died in the attacks or anything. But just a lot of sadness. I just remember. There were music concerts and stories about. There were stories about this person's daughter was on this plane and their ticket got changed and they weren't. Those stories were around for months, and you just kind of really just got wrapped into the stories behind the story. That's really what I was really gravitating to kind of make some sense of all that happened on 9/11. But people were shocked. They were sad. Some were angry, and it was a very trying time.
Oh, it was a big sense of sadness, big question mark. Where are we going? What's going to happen next? Where will the next attack come from? Or, how many people will die next? It put a big impact on everyone in the United States. Uncertainty, a slight, sadness or big sadness.
I think everybody was really, really shaken by it. I know that the Spanish kids that were here, I don't know that the kids were so shaken, but the teacher was very shaken. They still had their tickets that they used to go up up into the World Trade Center, stamped 11/26, the day before they were destroyed, the day before the towers were destroyed, and but the kids' parents in Spain were completely frantic, and they were glad to get the phone calls from their kids saying that it wasn't that day they were in New York, they were there the day before. But even that, the parents were still really frightened because they knew that their child had been at the top of that tower that no longer existed.
Another thing I'd like to say is that I'm having difficulty still forgiving those who did these acts to us in this country. The Lord's Prayer says we should be forgiving. And I have difficulty doing that in this case. I can forgive things that people do to me personally, but to do harm to someone that you don't know, just to do harm to this country, I can't understand why someone would do that.
Well, other than just to reiterate the idea that this was, probably one of the most life-changing events that I've ever experienced. It totally changed the way we do everything, and once again, it's kind of unnerving. Then again, it's also kind of comforting to know that we're able to adapt and try to prevent something like that from happening again.
I'm an AP Government and Politics teacher, and we talk about these issues all the time, and I really just think people need to be informed and about what's going on in the world. It's one of the reasons why we have a course called Human Geography for all freshmen when they come in. They get a little crash course in what's going on in the world today and how it got that way, and what that means for them. And that's our little effort here at John Carroll, to make sure that people are informed. And but it doesn't stop in high school. I think that that's really the biggest thing that I would add, is that as an educator, we're always learning, and I'm always learning, and it's important that we learn about other people, we learn about our history, just to stay informed.
We live in a country that is based on freedom, and not every country in the world is like this. And freedom of choice is what we want in our lives. And we all must try and continue to have that for ourselves, our children, our children's children, to be able to live free.
Well, my daughter now lives in New York. She worked on Wall Street and AIG for 7.5 years. And so I spent I've spent a lot of time in that area. And it took a long time for them to reconstruct the area into the park and museum that it is today. And there was, I have to say, there was a huge effect on people just walking by the destruction. Everyone, just their attitude completely changed when they were around that destruction. It was sorrow, it was fear, it was just thinking that it was an absolutely incredible situation. I mean, it was hard to believe that actually had taken place.